talk about distorted markets and the coming 2027 EPA new rules and regulations and the impact that may have on trucking. So we don't really have free markets. I know it seems ridiculous to say that because we're a free country, but we don't have free markets. We have a highly regulated industry. Um, and we have uneven enforcement of the rules and regulations that the government places upon us. So it's not free, and it's not fair. It's very much overregulated and totally unfair. So let me point out some of the regulations. Part of it is the EPA emission standards, right? Heavily regulated, and your hours of service heavily regulated. You know, uh, even speed limiters on trucks is another form of heavy regulation. You could argue whether these things are good or bad, but the fact of the matter is, it's heavy regulated. It's unfair in the sense that you have foreign competition. We can look at USMCA, that allows drivers from Mexico and Canada to deliver loads in the U.S., and they don't go home. They stay here in the U.S. So that's totally unfair. But there's uneven enforcement. DOT is not enforcing that rule. So and then you have foreign drivers, right? Now they put a pause on that, which is good, but they're importing a lot of drivers on visa programs that probably wasn't really designed for truck drivers, but the visa program was abused, and now the government has to put a pause on that. So what we see is the market conditions are not free. It's not a free market. It's not fair because you got a lot of unfair competition. Uh, and as an owner operator, you have to operate in this kind of environment. If everything was ideal, like a free market condition with with no unfair labor in a market, then your odds of success would be pretty straightforward. You do the work, you get paid. What could be simpler than that? But because it's a distorted market and you have unfair labor, you almost have to be somewhat of an artist or a magician as an owner operator to deal with all the complexities in the industry. To be successful is not really straightforward. It's much more complex. So, uh, if you're thinking about becoming an owner operator, you think, well, all I got to do is work hard and be successful. Well, not necessarily. There is an art to this, to being successful. Hard work in and of itself is not going to be enough because it's not a free and fair market, and you're going to face unfair competition. So you're going to have to be very imaginative, creative, and think outside the box, and try to make it work. Find a way to make it work. It's not as straightforward as 2 + 2 = 4. It's not that simple. It should be, but it's not. Now, we look at the EPA rules and regulations coming out for 2027. It is kind of going to distort the truck prices in the market for trucks. But what the industry is projecting is the new EPA rules for 2027 models going to add $20,000 to $40,000 costs to a new truck. Okay, so if you're a fleet and you're looking to buy equipment, you're probably going to front load the 2026 models before purchasing those 2027 models. There could be a rush, a last minute rush to purchase. If you're going to purchase new equipment, get the 2026 model. Don't wait for the 2027 model because the price is going to go up. New EPA requirements. So as fleets rush to get into the 2026 models, then there's going to be a higher inventory for the used truck market. And there may be demand for used trucks too, because again, they're avoiding the 2027 model. The 2027 model is on the books. It's headed this way, and it's going to have a price jump. So everybody's going to try to avoid that price jump. It's going to distort the market, because companies, first of all, companies don't want the new rules and regulations, the EPA. It tightens up the NOx emissions and the DPF emissions, and it's going to add cost to the truck. So fleets are going to adjust their strategies to act accordingly. As truck prices get higher and higher and higher, as the owner operator, you look at that and you're like, I just can't afford a new truck. And then that may affect low mileage used trucks. So Crete typically sells their trucks, at 400,000 miles. Well, the demand for those low mileage trucks like those could remain strong, or could go higher because of the 2027 EPA rollout. And right now, Crete's on them at 80. They were at 84,000, almost 85,000. If there is a distortion in the market, these prices could go higher. And then as a new owner operator, your choices are going to be somewhat limited. Now you're going to be looking at a high mileage truck. Instead of a truck with 400,000 miles, you may be looking at a truck that you can afford to buy that will be 600,000 or 700,000. And that probably won't have a warranty. And that's the worst case scenario for a brand new owner operator, is to buy a truck without a warranty. That is a bad deal. That will take all your money. Now, experienced owner operator like myself with 10 plus years experience, they can handle a truck without a warranty. We have the financial strength and we have the experience of breakdowns that we can deal with it. But a new owner operator, man, they'd be so far over their head in a very short period of time that it could be just a total loss. They'd jump into a truck, for low money down, say 20 or 30,000, and then the truck repairs could quickly add up for another 20, 30,000, and before you know it, they're out of money and they're out of it. They're going back to being company drivers. But these truck prices are going to get distorted because of the EPA rules. At 2027 models add $20,000 to $40,000 to the cost of a truck. Fleets are going to there's going to be a rush for those 2026 models, and then they're going to rotate out of their older equipment. Think like the 2022s, 2023s, maybe even the 2024s. They'll rotate out of those trucks. So those trucks will hit the used truck market. But because they're still low mileage, around 400,000 miles, they'll probably still have a hefty price. And then, as the food chain, where you find yourself on the food chain, you could find yourself looking at trucks with 600,000 or 700,000 miles, because that's more in your price range. But then they won't have the warranty. So, see, now you're screwed. You're totally screwed. The EPA just totally screwed you. But there's some talk that the Trump administration may delay the 2027 rule or eliminate it altogether, and that would take this pressure off the market for truck prices. It's awful hard because manufacturers have to design trucks to meet the new EPA requirement. They have to redesign the engines. They have to redesign the after treatment systems. They have to try to build components that are more durable, so they're not caught up in all the warranty issues. So once that ball gets rolling, you can't really stop it. The manufacturers are retooling their facilities. They've already got the supply chain ready to make the change, and you can't really pull the plug at the last minute. It's too much of a shock to the system. So time is running out, on that. But with a lot of these changes, it's just you don't have free markets. You have distorted markets. Now, in the freight market itself, you have a lot of things that are causing distortions. You have tariffs that's causing distortions in the market. You have pause on visas for foreign drivers. That's going to have an impact on the freight market, on prices. Uh, you have things like the big beautiful bill with tax incentives to purchase new equipment, but the economy's slowing down. So there's a lot of distortions in the market. It's not very clear. It's very murky. It's murky conditions out there right now. And as a business owner, you don't like that. You don't like it when it's murky. You like it when things are simple and clear. You know, Business owners like certainty. They don't like uncertainty. So things are kind of uncertain right now. Uh, they're uncertain about the direction that the freight market is going. They're uncertain about truck prices. They're uncertain about the 2027 EPA rules. Are they going to take effect or are they going to be delayed? You know, um, these things, well, it's going to work itself out over time, but it's going to take a little while. And during this time frame, you have somewhat slow freight, but maybe improving. You have tightening capacity in the market, um, which is good for spot rates. Um, you have lower interest rates are coming. So these things are good, but they will take many months to straighten out. And then, so here we are, 2025. Next year is 2026. If those EPA rules haven't been changed, these companies can't wait forever. They're going to start buying them 2026 models, and it's going to distort the truck prices. There could be a distorted uptick in truck prices because the demand for 2026 is high, and the demand for low mileage trucks with 400,000 miles will also be high. But they think truck prices, once they reach about 700,000 miles, then they really drop. They drop down a lot. And that's consistent with my experience is that you can't demand a high price for a used high mileage truck because the cost of the repairs goes up through the roof. So yeah, they could fetch a good price for a low mileage used truck, but not for a high mileage used truck. And 700,000 seems to be the threshold. If your truck is approaching 700,000 or over 700,000, it's not going to demand a good price. If it's closer to 400,000, it'll get a good price. Keep in mind too that dealerships really don't want your truck if it has 700,000 miles because they can't resell it. They can't get enough for it. They're like, well, you're going to have to sell that on your own because we're not going to take it as a trade-in. You know, uh, the lower your mileage, the better price you're going to get for your truck. But I think for what owner operators need to keep in mind is that when we think about our current equipment, like say for example you have a 2022 Freightliner Cascadia, and you think you would drive it for a few years and then you would get into something 3 years newer. Well, that would put you in that 2027 EPA greenhouse gas update, which may have a higher price. And it's like, well, I was thinking of getting another truck after my 2022, maybe getting into a 2025 or 2026. But if you get into this 2027s and later, the prices could be higher. You may be thinking about keeping your truck longer and doing an in-frame as a better solution than swapping it or rotating it every 3 years. The cost of becoming an owner operator keeps going up. When I first became an owner operator, I bought the 2012 and I paid like $48,000 for it. Then I bought the 2019. Now that was during peak freight. It was over $100,000. And now, here, a few years later, I mean, the prices do go up, prices do come down. Prices did come down to like 61,000 for 2021, but then prices are back up 84,000 for 2022. And it seems like the trajectory is over time, truck prices are going up and they keep going up. And if you're looking at it, 3 years from now, if you're looking at a used truck with 400,000 miles and they want $100,000 for that used truck, that is very expensive. And as a company driver, you can't really do that. You can't go out and buy. You have zero experience. You're gonna go out and buy $100,000 truck. That's really tough. That's really becoming a barrier to entry for these guys. You can't go out there with zero experience and buy $100,000 truck. That's way too much. Even 80,000 is way too much for a first-time truck buyer. But that's the direction that the industry is going, and the cost of becoming an owner-operator keeps going up, up, and up. And as a result, drivers are saying, well, for that price, they'll just stay as a company driver. And in many regards, that's what the company wants. They don't necessarily want their best drivers to become owner-operators. They would prefer to keep their drivers as company drivers. There's more profit in it if you stay as a company driver. But they'd be willing to sell you a truck rather than lose you altogether. They'd rather you become an owner-operator than leave the company. But they would make more profit off you if you stayed as a company driver. So if those used truck prices are high, that discourages a lot of guys from becoming owner-operators, which fits perfectly in with the company's desire to keep you as a company driver. You just throw your hands up in the air and say, forget it, I can't afford it at that price. But those guys who are owner-operators, every 3 years they're looking to buy another piece of equipment, and the prices of that equipment keeps going higher. And it's like, well, for that price, I'll do an in-frame in my old truck and keep it for another 3 years and just deal with the breakdowns. It's unfortunate. I think the 2027 EPA rules is geared towards pushing trucking companies into electric trucks. That was their aim. This was the Biden EPA. They had this big push for green initiatives, electric vehicles, including trucks. So it's a leftover or hangover from the previous administration, and it doesn't seem like the new administration, the Trump administration, is going to be able to move fast enough to get away from that 2027 ruling. Even if they did, the wheels are in motion. The manufacturers are already gearing up to build these new trucks with 2027 standards. They're going to have to act fast. If they got any chance of stopping it or delaying it, they better move fast, because these manufacturers can't stop in the middle of production and say, oh, never mind, we don't need this new technology. It's too late. They got the entire industry geared to those standards. You just can't turn it around in 6 months' time. These manufacturers have to tool up. They have to get supplies and subcontractors, sub-manufacturers. You're talking years of planning in advance to meet 2027 EPA rules and regulations. You just can't turn it off, instantaneously. It's like an aircraft carrier. Man, it's moving. And just because you want it to stop, it's not going to stop. Just like a truck, it's not going to stop. The truck is not going to stop just because you want it to. That these manufacturers, they got momentum. They are moving towards that 2027 EPA regulations. They can't turn on a dime. They can't stop that on a dime. If they're going to make any changes, they better do it quick. Otherwise, they have no choice but to design these trucks and build them as planned for the 2027 EPA regulations. That means truck prices are going to go up for new equipment. It'll have a ripple effect through the market. It'll be a distorted market. Just like there's a lot of distortions in the freight market, there's distortions in the truck pricing market as well. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.